consisting of motorcycle outriders, about 60 of them, 100 policemen on rollerblades, a further 100 officers jogging, and before and behind a large contingent in vehicles of the CRS riot police. So the chances, I think, of a pro-Tibet demonstrator getting anywhere near the flame, I think, are pretty infinitesimal.
I'll quote that back at you a little later.
Known, I mean, across the world, the wire services have now gone out saying Olympic torch off the streets, extinguished and so on, which is precisely the message which the protesters would have wanted. And even if it's thanks to the police and their desire not to avoid confrontation and take things softly, that this has happened, the point remains that twice now the flame has been taken off the streets of Paris.
Hugh, thanks very much. And just moments before that actually happened, and actually those pictures, they've got just a bit tighter on the bus, but you can see quite a large bank of people gathered above, and there was jeering and shouting just in the split second before they broke away and actually clambered onto the bus. So perhaps they took a look at some of those people gathered there and thought the better of actually continuing on the ground itself.
And our sports news correspondent Adam Parsons is watching all of this with us. Adam was in London yesterday when we saw not dissimilar scenes, of course, on the streets of our capital. And here we are again, Adam, the streets of the French capital. And yet again, and may well prove to be the case for some time to come, not what is envisaged, not what is intended, not what's wanted.
You'd think that they were transporting a murderer or a bit of radioactive material or something, wouldn't you, rather than an Olympic torch. On the faces of all the people around that torch, he's clearly fear, he's trepidation, and he's that sense, as you got in London, from a lot of the officials, that can this please just be over with as soon as possible, because this is nothing more than a nuisance. And it is worth reiterating, the whole point of an Olympic torch relay, it doesn't do anything, it doesn't do any, the Olympic torch does not achieve anything other than attempting to spread a bit of goodwill around. Well, that's not goodwill, is it? A torch being put onto a bus because it's being attacked so much, and images of protesters being pinned down by police. This is not what an Olympic torch relay is supposed to do. Now, clearly, these protesters will once again think that they're getting their point across exactly as they want to, which is that they are confronting the police, they're confronting the torch, and by extension, confronting China.
Exactly what you say. I mean, look at that, a bloodied protester. That is hardly the image that, I mean, certainly the Chinese would want, but the IOC have to be sitting, watching pictures like this, watching yesterday, and sort of scratching their heads. It's interesting that the head of the Norwegian Olympic Committee has said today that the torch relay should be reconsidered due to the public protests that we have seen. Is there any sort of indication, Adam, that the IOC is planning to look at this and think, actually, do we want much more of this as it globetrots 21 countries?
Well, that's a very interesting moment, because the IOC is a very, very proud institution. They very, very rarely say, we got that wrong. And so for a member to come out and say, well, actually, we may need to reconsider these things, not because, I'm sure this will be the point they will say, is we made the right decision, but we couldn't have foreseen these. And perhaps they're right. Who could have foreseen the trouble that happened in Tibet, happening pretty close to the start of this torch relay? I think the IOC will continue to say it was the right decision to give the Games to Beijing. Of course, it was a democratically made decision, but there will be deep disquiet for a couple of reasons. One is that this is not what the Olympian ideally is supposed to be, and whatever else you might say about the IOC, almost all of the people involved in it do believe very strongly in the sanctity of those. The second thing, rather more pragmatically, is the IOC earns a lot of money from global sponsors. And if you are paying a lot of money to be affiliated with the Olympics, this is not what you want.
Well, that was Kate Hoey's point, wasn't it? That the IOC themselves had perhaps deviated, moved away from the Olympic ideal itself. I mean, that's quite a charge, isn't it?
Yes, I have to say, I think these protests aren't about the Olympics. They're about China. These are specifically about Beijing. It's a chance to get China to make a protest about human rights, about Darfur. And yet that vehicle of the Olympic Games has given the world a focus for protest. And the IOC, as soon as it allowed the Games to be awarded to Beijing did leave itself open to these things happening. And as I was saying earlier, I remember those people saying that very point all those years ago, that this is a difficult deal, this is a big moment, it is not a safe decision. It is with risks to give the Games to Beijing, on the assumption that the spotlight that is then thrown onto Chinese society could act as a force for good, a phrase you hear so often, the Olympics will be a force for good, and yet at the moment the Olympics are really becoming is a fulcrum for global protest, and I think there will be great disquiet in the IOC that they are in a sense now being lumped in with the Chinese regime.